All right, here we are tonight with Bruce Jenne of Bruce's Bees. Really excited to be on. I've watched your channel for years. I think the first video that I saw was when you had, I think it was like when you were checking out those abandoned hives a few years ago.
Okay.
Um, and I've been watching you ever since. So can you give us a little background on what you do in your beekeeping journey?
Well, I started my dad passed away about 10 years ago, and at that point in time I had just kind of gotten a little interested in it before then, and I've always had a kind of obsession with insects since I was a kid. Like when I was in the what was it the I don't know how old I was, like first grade or something. I did an insect collection where I caught all kinds of insects and I had them on a pinned on a board and all kinds of stuff. We had an entomologist at our church that kind of taught me how to do some of that. And so I've just
Huh.
always been intrigued by nature and by insects, and never really particularly about bees, but I just kind of was. And so
Yeah.
there's a talk at a conference for church, I guess it was October of 2012, where the speaker talked about honeybees in the church and kind of how it all works together. It was
Yeah.
intriguing. And he talked about 40,000 bees in a hive and all that kind of stuff. And then I had a home health patient. I'm a physical therapist, and he had a couple of hives out back. He had some hives. He was old. He couldn't really manage them very well
Yeah.
anymore, but he talked to me about the honeybees and all the stuff they do and how cool they were. And I just kind of got interested in it. And some of the stuff he told me may not have been quite right, but he had kept bees for years and years. And so
Yeah.
it was really cool to talk to him. And then
Yeah.
all of a sudden actually April of 2013. My dad had just passed away a couple months earlier, and I asked my mom if I could put a couple of hives up on the farm and just to mess around with. And I knew nothing about what was inside a hive except bees,
Yeah.
nothing at all. And so I just, I think it was a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Like I had a friend who was a beekeeper, and it was getting on in April. Everything was blooming. I was driving around doing home health at the time,
Yeah.
I'm like, I better get some bees if I'm gonna get them. So I called up. His name was Nathan, and I said, "Hey, tell me about bees or whatever. How do I need to get them now?" And anyway, we talked about it, and so I
Yeah.
got online like that Monday or Tuesday night, and the next Saturday I had my two first hives. Really had no idea. I didn't even know what a frame was. I didn't know what 8 frame,
Yeah.
10. Didn't know what anything that was, and I went over to Nathan's house that Saturday morning, and he just took me on through a couple of hives real quick and identified the different kinds of bees. And then I drove a few miles from there and picked up my first two bees and set them on the hive stands, and there we go. But I've always just been intrigued. I was just hooked from the start and didn't really start off with any particular goals except to keep bees or to see what it was like. And just kind of it's developed. I've been obsessed with it ever since.
Yeah. A lot of us beekeepers get obsessed pretty fast. And I mean, the bees are fascinating creatures. It's not a mystery why.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's so I started it's almost exactly 5 years ago. Like in a week, it'll be my 5 year anniversary. And the funny part, like how I got started into it is my mom in 2017, so the year before we actually got bees, was like, "Do you want to get bees? Do you want to go to bee class with me?" And I'm like, "Okay." And so I agreed to it, and we went to bee class the next year since we were too late to sign up. And it was just like magic. Ever the first time I got into the hive, I was the one dumping the package in the hive. It was an interesting experience right from the start.
Oh yeah, it's just amazing. Yeah, I didn't have any idea. I had no idea what was going to happen, but it was really cool to get started. And I still am fascinated by them. Today, I spent pretty much all day in them, and just
Yeah.
things didn't go as I had hoped. I'd made a bunch of splits, and I was checking on them, but just the whole, it's just you figure out things to do with them, and just spending time with them. There's
Yeah.
it's just this any day in the bee yard is a good day.
Yeah.
Typically, not always, but typically.
Most of the time, though. Yeah.
That's right.
Um, so have your bees got back from pollination yet?
No, they haven't, and it's
Wow.
been kind of aggravating. They're supposed to have been back a while ago, but they've had so many issues with
Yeah.
rain. It's muddy, and they haven't been able to get them out of there yet. So hopefully they're going to be leaving California on Monday. That's the last I heard, and we'll get them towards the
Yeah.
end of next week. Hopefully they'll come in, and we'll start getting into those things. But I had everything else here locally kind of set up, and I kind of prepare everything that's left behind and get it ready so I can just focus on the pollination bees. and they haven't gotten back yet. So I've kind of been like, what do I do? But today I found some stuff to do. So really what I do is I kind of just let the production hives just kind of fend for
Yeah.
themselves for 2 or 3 weeks while I'm getting the pollination bees going. And today I was actually able to do some real good evaluation of some things and get some hives combined and dump some
Yeah.
unsuccessful splits out and just kind of really get the bees down in Slocum situated in a better position than I would have if the pollination bees would have been back. So
Yeah. How many hives do you send to pollination this year?
I sent 52. We had, I think,
Wow.
432 on the truck, but I sent 52 of those. So
Is the one beekeeper producing the other 300 something?
no, there are three of us. Uh there's a young guy, Davis and David are their names. David is my original mentor that I bought my
Yeah.
original equipment and bees from. And he's probably about my age, give or take a year or
Yeah.
two. And he really kind of helped me get through. Just
Yeah.
he tolerated me all the questions I had, and he was real patient. Still is patient with me occasionally, but
Yeah.
and then Davis is a young guy that he's in his 30s. He's actually a banker. He does
Yeah.
quite well with that, but he's obsessed with bees too. And he's the one that arranged the truck and got everything ready to go. And
Yeah.
so he's the one that kind of worked with the broker and everything. And so but they're not back yet. It hasn't been the best year, the best experience for us this year. And
Yeah.
but hopefully they'll come back and be strong enough to make a little honey for us, and we'll just move forward.
Yeah. So last year when they got back, you split them and then supered them, right? I'm
That's
assuming.
right.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, we split them. That's right. Split them. And the donor colonies made a lot of honey.
Yeah.
I think I don't even remember how much it was. It was at least like, I don't know, 70 or 80 boxes off of
Wow.
40 plus colonies, or it may have been like 60 something, but it's a lot of boxes off. And that was the second harvest, the bigger harvest. We got a few the first time, I think, but the ones
Yeah.
that I split off actually didn't make a whole lot. They made a little bit.
Yeah.
The splits I made, they just didn't grow big enough to really produce a lot of honey last year. But yeah, that's what I did. I split them and I supered them. This year, I'm not sure if I'm going to split them right away because I,
Yeah.
I just need to make some honey. So I think if the temperatures are low enough when they get here, I think I'm going to slap some Formic Pro on them and then just start supering them up. And that'll hopefully slow the queens down. But we'll see. I have no idea what they're going to look like. And I
Yeah.
think the temperatures are supposed to be okay for Formic. And so I've never done that before, but I've been
Yeah.
impressed with what the Formic has done with the couple of hives I've used it on so far. It's really been a good result. And
Quite
so
potent. Yeah.
I want to try it on those if they're strong enough and if it's not too hot.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had really good luck with Formic. I've only lost like 2 or 3 queens out of 20 plus and 20 plus treatments, maybe even closer to 50.
Yeah.
And I also like one of my hives, I think they tested might have been like an 18, and then I treated them, and then a few weeks later they were down to a 4, I think. So very high mite kill.
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
really
It
took down
seems
a lot of mites. Yeah.
seems to be effective in the bees, at least in a couple of colonies I've used it on. They seem to actually look better after.
Yeah.
It's almost like that queen just really starts laying it kind of snaps her into a better laying brood pattern. I'm not sure what it is. It's just kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I've been
Healthier
impressed by it,
bees.
yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. I to give you an idea, of course I'll be gone next week on a trip, but next week, of course, will be the first warm week of this spring. We're supposed to get 68, 70, and 68. So a lot warmer temperatures than normal.
Yeah, it's been warm here for a long time. So
Yeah.
it never gets. I mean, it gets cold here, but it's just
Yeah.
a couple of days usually. If you lived here in the South, I mean, you understand that it's not
Yeah.
near as
No.
nothing like it is up there. But
No.
I've lived in Utah before, and I've got family up north, and I mean,
Yeah.
I understand what it's like to be cold. And
Yeah.
Utah's getting hammered. They're still getting snow. Like just in the
Yeah.
past few days, they've had some big time snow out there. So it's just some springs just never want to come. It's just the winter just keeps
Yes.
out there. It's not that often it happens, but this is one of those years out there, I guess. But
Yeah. Ian just got another foot of snow like a day or two
yeah, it's
ago.
just I couldn't. That would just be. I'm not sure if it'd be worth it to try and hassle with what he hassles with. I don't know. On an
Yeah.
annual basis, it's just moving him in and out of the sheds and all that stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'd be worth it, but maybe it would.
I think you'd find a way to do it.
I may.
It's
I don't
it's
know.
too interesting not to do. Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
maybe so.
last Sunday it got down to 23 degrees here. So it's still getting down there at night.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, as long as it warms up in the daytime, though, that way the bees can fly a little bit. They do okay
yeah,
if it, they do fine.
it's like 40 to 50 during the day, but it's just always windy here in the spring. Like most days we have 10 plus mile per hour winds um, every day. So it really it takes down that temperature enough where they're barely flying a lot of days,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So you're talking about honey supering your hives once they get back from pollination. So when does your main honey flow start down there in southern Alabama?
Um, the main one starts, well, really we have 2 I would
Yeah,
call main flows. In the springtime, it just kind of flirts with us a little bit. Like right now,
yeah,
today I noticed some stuff coming in. I think at one of my spots, the Honey Hill Farm, it's those are some hives I
yeah,
manage for a guy. They tulip poplar is just right behind the hives. There's some great big huge
it's
trees, and
cool.
they're starting to bring in some nectar there, and so it's looking pretty good. And the privet's just about to bloom. It's starting to bloom a little bit, and the privet is the first what I would call
Yeah,
significant flow here. If you're sitting around some tulip poplar, then of course that would count because
yeah,
tulip poplar is really good. But you're not tulip poplar's not everywhere, and so
yeah,
privet's the first probably significant flow where you have a good amount of honey come in, but that's kind of hit or miss. But the biggest flow is the tallow flow.
yeah.
Down here, they call it popcorn trees. It's
Really?
also called Chinese tallow, and so it's an invasive species that everybody hates it except for beekeepers, I think. But
Yeah,
it's really a very productive source of honey, and it's a unique honey. It's a kind of a strong flavor honey, but it's good. People love it, and so that's our biggest flow, and
yeah,
it starts probably mid to late May and goes through the first or second week of June, and we're pretty much done after that. So privet's starting mid-April is coming up here pretty quick. It goes
yeah,
through for about 3 or 4 weeks, and then the tallow kicks in pretty close after that. And then when the tallow is over, it's just kind of trickles in off and on. So we don't have a long season of honey.
yeah,
In the fall, like right now in the spring and like in January, we start having like the red maples and different things start
yeah,
to bloom, and that's why they build up. But they're not a huge flow that just produces honey. The bees just build up on it, and then it'll stop for a week or two, and then
yeah.
it's kind of very frustrating. But that's kind of how the flows work here.
Yeah, it's flows are always seem to be a crapshoot. Like you just never know. And some places are pretty similar to yours. Like sounds like you get a flow for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, and then you have that kind of grace period in between the privet and the tallow. And yeah, it's not. It'd be nice if it just kept going.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So um, when you're trying to produce honey, like what methods do you use to try to maximize your production? Like what goals do you have in mind when you're trying to get your hives ready for the honey flow?
I'm kind of going through that a little bit right now with the ones that got left behind from pollination. And what
Yeah,
I do is I start just putting. Uh, I have an advantage of having quite a bit of drawn comb, and
yeah,
so that's the key. Really, is that
yep,
drawn comb. That's how you make a big crop. And at first, it's difficult to do that, obviously. But
yeah,
the way I do it is, if you really want to make a big crop, you don't split your hives. You know,
yeah,
if they don't swarm. If they swarm, you might as well split your hives. And the
yeah,
hives with the older queens in them, the colonies that have the older queens, or if they get too crowded, they're going to swarm anyway. So my theory is kind of why not go ahead and pull a split? And sometimes those early spring splits are a little more risky. Like I noticed that this year, I'm going to do a video on what I found today. We didn't have a tremendous success rate with the cells that we put in there, but we did have some, and so that's more hives
yeah,
than I would have had, and they probably would have been in the trees. I found that there are
yeah,
methods you can use, and I'm still trying to figure that out where you can prevent swarming. But when you got an old queen, if she's a year and a half to 2 years old, lots of times they just want to swarm because that's what
yeah,
nature wants them to do. And so sometimes you can stop it. Sometimes they're just going to do it. And so what I typically do is like what I've done the last couple of years is just pull early splits, and then that creates some space for them, some things for them to do. And then I just kind of let them go for a little while, and then I start stacking supers on before I anticipate the first flow. And I usually put, if it's a super packed out colony, I'll put maybe 2 supers on there. If it's a kind of a mediocre to, single deep, like 8 frame type thing, or I'll maybe put 1 super on there, and I'll let them start working it. I just let them start working up in there. I don't put an excluder on there or anything. I let them start working that comb. And even if the queen goes up there and starts laying a little bit, it's okay. I don't care. And then what I do when they really get working that and they start putting honey in and they're really happily working up there, then I shake all the bees down, or if the queen's up there, if I see her, I just put her down in the bottom. Whatever I want my brood chambers to be. And then I put the excluder over the top and then put the honey supers back on. And something, I think it was Gus and or Randall Carter, may have been, I can't remember, but they talk about how you need to have an upper entrance if you have a queen excluder. I think Gus talks about that. And so the way they do it is they offset. Like I used to just put a stick in there big enough for the bees to come in and out just under the lid, but they offset the boxes. They push them forward enough so like there's about enough for a bee space right there. That does a couple of things. Number one, I think it allows an upper entrance. I'm not sure how much they actually use that entrance. They may use it some, but it really helps them with ventilation, and they would just love it. Also, if you have any drone comb that's in that if the queen is laid there and got any drone comb up there where she started to lay, when those drones emerge, they can escape there with that upper entrance because they can't get through the excluder.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I do, and then I just monitor it and I see what's happening, and if they start to, pack it out, if they start to get too full, I just I put more supers on, and I do that until I decide to do my first harvest. So that's kind of how I do it. I draw them up with the comb. If I want to draw out comb, what I've done in the past is I learned from a guy, Tim Ives. He's up in Indiana. I learned from him way back. He supers boxes. He supers like boxes and not frames. In other words, he'll put a whole frame of empty. He'll put a whole box of empty frames, empty foundation in there. He puts the whole box of comb above, and they draw that out quickly. That's what he does. But I've kind of tried different things, and what they'll typically do is they'll draw out enough frames in the middle to where they can then have easy access, and then they don't always draw the outside frames out quite as well that way. And so what I've started doing, what I'm going to do more of, and I kind of do a little bit of all of it, but one thing you can do is what Gus Mitchell does. He'll put 1 or 2 frames in between. Usually, I think he usually does 2 frames in the middle of a 10 frame box of comb on the outside, and they'll draw those 2 frames out really fast. So if you have enough drawn comb to do that, where you can just kind of start introducing more frames here or there, they really draw those out super fast. And so that's another way to do it. But it is a challenge if you don't have comb. It's a challenge to get that stuff drawn out. So you just have to kind of
suck it up. Get it done.
And just get it drawn. But once it's drawn, and then you can just reuse it year after year after year, and it works. It's just that comb is gold. It's for honey, especially. I mean, it's gold period, but for honey, they don't have to do near as much work. They'll clean it up, they'll straighten it up, and then they fill it up with honey, and they go right to the next box. And it just happens so much faster when you have that drawn comb.
For sure, yeah. A beekeeper in the area where I live, she's actually a teacher at my high school. She says if they have a drawn super, they can fill it up and cap it in a week here on our main flow. So it's drawn. It's so hard. Like for me, I didn't get any drawn comb until my 4th season. But boy, was I happy when I saw them in those supers finally after all that time. I'd been waiting so long.
It took you 4 years, huh?
Four seasons. Yeah.
So you did you get any honey before then at all?
A little bit from the deeps. So my first year I didn't get any honey. My second year I didn't get any honey. My third year I got 25 pounds. And then my 4th year, 80. Last year I got 235. So
okay. Well, you got some comb. You got some comb built up then a little bit, so that'll be good.
Yeah. I've got 7 supers.
But just start introducing it a little bit at a time. You got 7 supers of comb right now.
Yeah.
So see if you wanted to, if you wanted to use the Gus Mitchell method, you could put 2 or 3. You could even checkerboard maybe 3 frames in there between your comb, and they kind of just checkerboard it in there, and they can fill out 3. And that way you can create more supers. Does that make sense? Like if you want to have 10 supers, you could just put 7 frames, like divide that into the 10 supers, and then kind of checkerboard the foundation in between it.
Yeah.
Near the middle, because they always like to work the middle first. And so I would put the foundation near the middle. But if you checkerboard it in like that, maybe that'll work for you.
Yeah, I saw Gus's video, so I already have it all set up. So
Good.
that
Okay.
I've got like 7 fully drawn supers, and they either have 1 or 2 frames of foundation, and then I've got one box that's got a bunch of partially drawn frames. So my
Okay.
plan is,
Good.
if I've got the drawn frames next to the completely undrawn frames, they'll probably
Yeah,
fatten
that
out the
happens sometimes.
combs.
Yeah, that happens
So
sometimes.
my plan is, once they start to draw it out, I'm going to pull them all out and put them into the same box. So then I
Okay.
won't screw up the spacing, and then
Yeah.
I'll just space them out to 8 frames. That's my current plan. So
Okay.
I've got 26 honey supers, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So best case scenario, I make almost 800 pounds, but my goal is like 300. But it could be anywhere above
Yeah.
300. Yeah.
Yeah, that can happen if you checkerboard and a honey super. If you
Yeah.
checkerboard the empty foundation in between, it can happen that way. So
Yeah.
that's one reason I think Tim does he just does the supers. Like he'll put a whole
Yeah.
super of foundation on there because they don't tend to do that. If you put 10 frames of foundation in a
Yeah.
box,
They
they
don't.
don't tend
Yeah.
to fatten it. But if you put a couple frames right together, then they'll do it. So anyway,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of ways to do it, all kinds of things to try.
Yeah.
And
That's
another thing now, if you put it in between, like if they start to put honey up there and they cap it,
yeah.
and then you put those frames in there, then they probably won't extend that out further, I would think. I don't know. I've
Yeah.
never thought about that too much. But if you put a frame of foundation between 2 capped frames of honey, I doubt if they
Yeah.
would. They probably
No.
wouldn't uncap it and re-extend it out. So that's a thought as well. But
Yeah, it's true.
anyway, there's all
It's
kinds of ways to do
interesting.
it. You got to try it.
Yeah.
You just got to try it, and it works well. That's how I've
Yeah.
drawn almost all my comb over the years. It's just I slap a. I'll just what I'll do lots of
Yeah.
times. What I've done is I'll stack. I'll figure out where my brood box is, because an empty a box of foundation also serves like a queen excluder. The queen doesn't like to go across empty foundation,
Yeah.
and so you can. Tim uses the principle of, he talks about the hoarding instincts of bees.
Yeah.
They want to hoard honey, and they want to make wax. Basically hoard or make wax, and so that's what he tries to do. Is he puts his drawn comb above whatever level. Like he uses that super as a queen excluder. He puts that super above the brood chamber, and then he stacks the comb on top of that. And they do the worker bees will walk across the foundation to put honey above, and the wax bees
Yeah.
come and they draw that foundation out. But the queen will start laying in that immediately. She loves to lay in that new wax. So once you start seeing eggs popping in there, she's starting to draw that comb out. Then you can make sure she's down below, and then you can put that excluder in, and they'll keep going up and down. Tim doesn't use
Yep.
excluders, but I prefer to use excluders. Just I've over the years, it's just not
It's
worth it to
too
me
much
to
hassle.
try to
Yeah.
buy. I used to never use them, and I just would have to always be picking through frames and trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
But they some hives just won't go through an excluder unless they're up there working them beforehand. But once you have bees up there working,
Yeah.
man, they typically just ignore it, almost like it's not even there, and they go right up through it.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense, because you're doing 2 things when you add that box of foundation and comb. Because if there's just the foundation, then they might start backfilling the brood nest when they're trying to get that drawn out, and obviously that could lead to some swarming. But by adding the drawn box, they're able to throw what they have already into the comb, so they don't clog up the brood nest. But also, you're working towards what you want, which is brand new comb.
Yeah.
I did a similar thing last year. I didn't have barely any drawn supers, but what I did was I put a blank foundation box, and then once the bees started drawing and going up there, and once they got part of it drawn, I threw on a queen excluder and sent them back down below. But yeah, I didn't want to risk them just not be willing to go up there because I had a queen excluder when it was undrawn.
Yeah, they'll, especially if it's not a super big flow
Yeah.
coming in, they just won't go. Sometimes some of them don't care, but some of them, they talk about how it's a honey excluder. Sometimes, I mean, that is the case.
Yeah.
But it usually isn't a problem at all if
Yeah.
unless if they've been up there working it.
So Grayson's got to know, Bruce, how many hives are you looking for? # 200.
Well, the truth is, with the pollination bees delayed like they are, I'm not sure if I'm going to really try to grow too much this year. I may just try to kind of just be strong with what I got, treat for mites, and just see. I don't know if I'm going to be doing. I'm going to do some more splits. Right now, depend if all the pollination bees were to come back healthy, which they probably
Yeah.
won't, but if they were, I
Yeah.
would be sitting at probably a little like 110, 120, maybe 130.
Yeah.
And so I could easily increase that very quickly. I've got some queens coming from Corey Stevens.
Yeah.
And so when those come, that's going to be, I think, 10 or 12. I think 10 is what I ordered. So that'll be a few more. And so that, I anticipate being up around 150 again this year, probably. I
Yeah.
don't know if I'll get to 200. It's just tough to manage it. Like, what I did today, and there'll be a video coming out soon, but I went down there and I started off with, 21 that I was going to, check on, and I ended up, I think, with
Yeah.
13 out of that were actually had queens in them, or a couple of them were kind of iffy. And I did some moving some stuff around and maybe try and stimulate
Yeah.
some more queens being made. But I've just learned that it's just, man, just don't try to milk them along. And it's hard for me because I don't want them to die out, but if they're not going to make it, why are you going to drag them out 2 more weeks? So I feel like if you shake the bees all out of those weak colonies, they're going to find somewhere to go. So the two things: number one, they'll be able to strengthen your other
Yeah.
colonies, and number two, they'll be able to lead productive lives for the rest of the days that they have. It may not be very many, but they can at least be productive and doing something
Yeah.
they want to do. And so instead of just letting them fizzle out and slowly die out, I think it's better
Yeah.
to do that. So that's kind of what I've learned over the years.
Yeah, I mean, I just shake out the hives when I think it's over. So, if I see laying worker, I'm not going to spend much more time on that hive. Like I my
Yeah.
third or fourth year, I did the bee math. I knew that if the queen didn't come back by this date, 10 days for her to go on her mating flight, 8 days since I saw the cap cell. When I went in there, I didn't see a queen, and I saw a
Yeah.
bumpy drone brood. I knew I was done, so I just shook them out.
Yeah.
You got to listen to the bees and just realize what's going on in the hive. I feel like.
That's right. And it's just sometimes it just doesn't work. So,
Yeah.
but like I said, if I hadn't have done the splits, I would have had more bees in the trees. They would have split
Yeah.
themselves, and I wouldn't have had the increased numbers. And so
Yeah.
it was worth doing. And that's giving away a little bit of the end of the story. But there were some other things that happened that it's going to be quite the adventure today. So it'll be quite the video. I don't know how exciting it'll be to you guys, but to me, I think it's going to turn out pretty cool.
Yeah.
Even though it wasn't the best result. So that's a little bit of a
sneak peek. Yeah.
yeah, a little bit of a sneak peek for everybody that's on here. Not, so if you watch this, you won't know the ending, but kind of some of the things that happen anyway.
Yeah. So how much did they pay you per hive this year, if you can say?
I really don't want to address that. We've
Yeah.
had some issues with some things with the broker, and so I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the going rate was. I think it was pretty much like what it's been in past
Yeah.
years, but we've had some issues with some things that I really can't discuss on here tonight.
Yep.
This year has not been as positive of an experience as what it has been in the past, and
Yeah.
so I really can't discuss that too much. But I think we theoretically were supposed to get what the going rate was, but anyway. That's about all I can
Yeah.
say.
You're not the only one I've heard on YouTube talk about the almonds. Not well for a lot of reasons, but the prices included. Yeah, not the most productive almond season from the pictures, at least.
We'll see. We'll see how they come back. I think they're going to be. Hopefully, they'll be okay. But
Yeah.
there were just some things that happened that I'm not sure the bees were bad or that they're even
Yeah.
weak right now. But there were just some issues out there with this. It's been so muddy.
Yeah.
They haven't been able to get them out of the orchard still yet, so they're going to be leaving hopefully Monday. And I think I talked about that earlier, but yeah, they're not back yet. So we'll see.
Do you know how much that affects the almond production? Like I saw snow on a lot of the almond fields. Do you have any idea what
I'm sure
that means?
I'm sure it affects it, but I don't know. I really
Yeah.
don't know I don't know a lot about the almonds, actually, the life cycle. Obviously it can't be good,
Yeah.
but I know that one thing that I've heard, a term they use is a flash bloom, which is where it blooms really fast.
Yeah.
And this year was more, it was turning out to be more of a regular speed type bloom where we were in Northern California, which theoretically I think is better, maybe, but I think with all the snow and the cold, I'm not sure if it ended up being a real good bloom or not. I know they had flight time. I know they had some blooming going on. I know things happened, but I'm not sure, how it all turned out for them out there. It was a rough year, but now California needs the rain, and so it was bad on the
Yeah.
almonds, but in the future, maybe it'll really help things going forward,
Yeah, for sure.
moving ahead.
It I- at least like a month ago, everyone I think I saw there was like 3 feet or 4 feet of snow in the Sierra Nevada mountains in California. Like it was just a ridiculous amount of snow because the
Yeah, it's
rainstorms that passed through the places like lower in elevation were so intense they turned into snowstorms and just insane amount of water in the form of snow and
oh,
rain.
yeah, yeah,
Just
it becomes they have flash floods. They have a lot of issues when that snow starts to melt. It can be really
absolutely.
bad.
Yeah.
I think
Uh,
especially I think if it heats up quickly. I don't know all the details. Well, my wife is from Utah, and I lived out there for a
yeah.
while, and they really depend on that snow to fill up the reservoirs and the drinking
Yeah.
water, to have water to drink and to take care of stuff. And so in that respect, their reservoirs are
Yeah,
going to be filled
for
up.
sure.
I've seen friends from California posting reservoirs that are almost full that have been almost empty, like great big
Yeah.
huge lakes and reservoirs. And same thing going to happen in Utah. So there's a lot of good things about
Yeah.
it, but it's a miserable experience right now
Yeah.
going through it. So
Yeah, it's beekeeping is like any agriculture. You just never know. It's
yeah,
it's
that's right.
you can't control the weather. I was talking with Nathan a few weeks ago, and he's like, "But it wouldn't be any fun if you could." That was
Yeah,
his answer.
well, that's true. I guess that's true.
Yeah, I mean, part of what makes it so special is we can't control the bees for sure. We definitely can't control the weather.
Yeah, you can have more control over the bees than the weather, that's for sure.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you can at least
definitely.
do things to manage the bees, but you can't really
Yeah,
manage the weather. But
yeah.
it is what it is, and it's just it is what it is.
How
So
how long have you been sending bees to pollination?
um let's see. I think this might be my fourth year. I'm
Wow.
trying to remember. 32, 44, 48. I think it's my fourth year, I believe.
And it's worked out really well till this year, at least so far.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's worked out fine. I'm just a very small, like little
Yeah,
little blip. I get invited to go with the bigger folks,
yeah,
and so I just have been fortunate in that respect. I have some good friends that invite me along, and I'm not going to cry if I don't get invited. It's a good opportunity. It's an
yeah,
opportunity to make a little money, but frankly, it's a lot of work. You have to stimulate the bees when they don't want to be stimulated necessarily. Don't need to be stimulated for local production, and
yeah,
it's just a lot of work when you should be resting. So anyway,
yeah,
it's all right. It's all right though. I enjoy it, and if it's a good year, the pay is pretty good. But I mean, if you think about it, if you can kind of start feeding them and doing these early splits and building up early, if you can break
yeah,
off a split every year, you'll get basically the equivalent per hive of a pollination colony, and then keep your bees home and you can manage them here. But it's just, I don't know. We'll see what happens. It's fun to do, and they like me to go along, I think. And my bees that I send, I'm always almost overly sensitive and careful to make sure they're strong. And so
yeah,
I think my bees have been good this year. They were stronger than they've ever been from top to bottom, and so that's why I'm gonna be shocked if they didn't grade well
yeah,
supposedly, but we think there's some things going on out there because
yeah,
all the bees we sent from all three of us were super strong and heavy bees. As a matter of fact, the
yeah.
truck, we were going to try to send, I think, 456 colonies, and we ended up a little short with 432, and the truck was almost too heavy. And so that just shows you how strong the colonies were when they left, how heavy they were. And so there's
Yeah.
something's kind of weird, but the weather was just weird. Who knows? We'll see when they get back. If they're super booming colonies, which I think they probably are, then it'll be a little irritating, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I just still need to go into it much more than
So,
that.
yeah, do you think it had anything to do with their genetics, like them being the strongest, like they just started earlier than your other bees, or just bigger going into winter? Any idea why you think those were the biggest ones?
No, well, you just stimulate them and feed them. Yeah, it's genetics are involved for sure.
Yeah,
I mean, it's genetics are the basics, but if they're heavy Italian, they build up. They never really drop back. Here in the South, they never
yeah,
really quit laying. But if you feed them, any of them, if you start feeding them, and we never have, we're up in the 50s and 60s.
yeah.
We're never more than 2 or 3 days, usually away from like a day in the 60s or sometimes even
Wow.
70s
Yeah,
in the middle of February. I mean, it's always, we'll have 2 or 3 days of cold weather. It might freeze at night or whatever, but even then in the daytime, a lot of times it gets in the 50s or 60s. And so you can
Yeah.
stimulate them. They do brood back. They do, stop brooding up, and they kind of slow way down in the wintertime, mainly because there's nothing coming in. There's not much flow
Yeah.
coming in. That's the real reason, I think, more than the temperatures. But if you start feeding them, you start putting stimulate stuff to stimulate them, they'll just start brooding up like crazy. They'll think it's almost like it's springtime. And so that's what you have to do about, if you send them out like late January, about mid-December or late December, early January, you just start socking the feed to them. I usually just like open feed. You can close feed them or whatever, in hive feed them.
Yeah.
You start sticking the food to them in late December and January, and within immediately she starts laying, and before you know it, you've got a hive packed full of brooding bees. And so you can do it. Now you can't do that up where you're at,
No. Yeah.
but you can do it here. I mean, literally, it's just like a international airport. Just those bees go
Yeah.
crazy. They love it when I usually open feed. It works really well. I don't know. It's what I've done. I haven't done a lot of in hive feeding at all, but I may start doing some of that in the future. I don't know, but it works. It's really kind of a cool thing to behold when they're just going at it. It's kind of
Yeah.
cool.
So did you open feed one yard specifically, and then not the others, or did you do all of them? I'm just curious.
I just check the weight. Typically, yeah, I definitely feed the pollination bees when it's time to make
Yeah.
sure they're strong. But I don't feed the others unless I feel like I need to. I probably
Yeah.
should. And I typically open feed everything. That's my preferred method. It's so
Yeah.
easy. I think it's a little lazy, and I might need to look into some other stuff, but it
It's
just works
cheaper.
well. The small weak hives do suffer from that a bit. They don't get, because the big hives
Yeah.
obviously dominate that open feeder. So it may not be the best way overall, but I've done it for years, and it works fine. And
Yeah.
I've started using the Hive Alive fondant on the light colonies of the weak ones. And, I can cut it for a nuke. I'll cut a Hive Alive fondant patty in half and put it on there, and it does fine. And so, it's more of a survival thing. They're not going to build up on that stuff, but if I have some
Yeah.
that are super light, that's what I do. And that's what I've done the last couple of years. It saved me on several colonies, I think. And now they're starting to bounce back and starting to put a little nectar in. And so, but I did put a little Hive Alive on a couple of those splits I made,
Splits. Yeah.
the four-way split. I put a couple of patties on today, the 1-to-4-way one I did on that pallet. A couple of
Yeah.
those are still, they've got a lot of brood. The bees are doing good, but they just don't have a lot of food coming in yet, but it's starting to trickle in. The other two are just booming. They're just really just blowing it out, but two of them are a little bit weak. And so I've stuck that on there. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I
It's
do it.
yeah. I mean, open feeding is definitely less expensive than buying an individual feeder for each hive.
Yeah.
Um, I did a tiny bit of open feeding from just basing off of what I've seen from Ian's videos, but I never really had a specific reason. If you only have 6 or 7 colonies in one location, it
Yeah.
doesn't really make sense to open feed. So I haven't really done that much yet. But
Yeah. I really like the Apple colonies and the way those feeders
yeah,
are. I like just being able to lift the lid off and just put the food in there.
yeah,
And I could do something like that. But, I worked with Seth Hill that day a couple of weeks ago, 2, 3
yeah,
weeks ago, and it's really not that big a deal if you've got the right equipment, you've got
yeah,
the gas pump handle, or even mine would probably work. Although I probably would need a gas on the pump if I do that, but you just
yeah,
slide the box, offset it or slide it forward a little bit and then just fill it up and close. It's not like you have to take all the
yeah,
frames out. You just basically have to shift the boxes around to fill those up. So it's not a big deal. It's just an expense thing. And it is, you got to get the hive
yeah.
set up with it. Once it's set up, I think it's pretty easy to do that. That's what a lot of people do.
Yeah, Ashby, same thing with him. He does the same thing
Yeah.
with
But
the
if you
live
really,
feeders.
that's the way to make sure your bees are getting the food, is just to feed it
Yeah,
inside the colonies. If you want to make sure your bees are getting the nutrition, that's probably the best way to do it. Or the bucket feeding that Greg does, the
yeah,
buckets with the jars on top. There's different ways to do it. Greg prefers the buckets, but it's just different. It's just whatever your opinion is.
yeah. I think buckets allow you the most control. Like just depending on how many holes you punch. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
with a lot of the other top hive feeders and um, with the frame feeders, they work great and they're great at giving a lot of syrup to the bees. But like in my August period, if I start putting those feeders on to stimulate the hives for winter, they just suck it all down and throw it in the brood nets, which is not what I want them to do. I want want them to like slowly take it down. And so that's
Yeah.
where I think a bucket would really come in handy to slowly build them up for the winter rather than them just going crazy, eat it all quick, and then throw it in the brood nest.
Yeah.
So
Well,
hopefully,
it really just depends on what you're trying to do, and
absolutely.
the genetics do play a role too, because the Italian bees they just never slow down. They do consume a lot of food, but they just, you'll have, 3 or 4 frames of brood, um, in the middle of winter in those things. I mean,
Yeah.
they just, even if you don't feed them, they just try to keep some brood. And the Carniolans, it's like there's just nothing in there. Even here in Alabama, where it doesn't ever really
Yeah.
get cold, they just shut it down. Well, I think they just shut it down with the flows. If there's nothing coming in,
Yeah.
they try to shut it down. And if there's food coming in, the Carniolans can explode in the spring. I think Russians are a lot like that. And
Yeah.
so it's just really the genetics, and honestly, I don't know that there are a lot of purebred bees out there.
No, definitely
Especially,
not.
in my situation, I've got all kinds of stuff. There are feral bees all around. And
Yeah.
so I mean, I don't know what mine are. If I do order from, like if I order mated queens from big time queen producers, then I trust what they tell me is true. So I
Yeah.
trust those as being Italians or Carniolans or heavy influence of those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
But Greg will tell you his are Caucasian Appalachian mutts. And
Yeah.
so, there's a combination of a lot of things in the bees, but that's one reason mine are so inconsistent, because I've got a little bit of everything out there. So it's kind of,
Yeah.
and then they're mating with drones. They're a little bit of everything. And so that's kind of what, I'm dealing with, but it works out okay. The bees down here, bees do well here. It's a good
Yeah.
spot for them. If you just leave them alone, they figure out how to survive. But if you're trying to pull honey from them, if you're trying to take care of them and utilize them to your purposes, then you do have to obviously manage them
Yeah.
and do what you need to do.
It's yeah, you seem to be in a pretty good honey area, I would say.
It is for like in Ohio, like some places they'll have a honey flow from like June until September, never
Yeah.
stops. And ours are just like really quick, short honey flows, and
Yeah.
especially the tallow is like, I tell people, the privet and the spring honey is like a water hose, or like kind of like a trickle.
Yeah.
In late winter, early spring, it's like a trickle. And then, when the privet hits, like right now with the tulip poplar and privet coming in, it's like a water hose.
Yeah.
And then when the tallow comes in, it's like a fire
Like a
hose.
fire hose.
They
Yeah.
just fill it up. They fill up. So you almost can't keep the honey super stacked on fast enough. But when the tallow stops, it's just done. And so
Man,
then it
yeah.
becomes very difficult. There's a few little things that bloom during the summer, and really are
Yeah.
pretty much done until the goldenrod and the fall stuff comes in. And sometimes that's not a very good flow at all. But there are cotton fields around, and they do really good on cotton
Yeah.
sometimes, and most of the time they do good on cotton, especially if it's irrigated. And there's some other crops and things around that bloom a little bit. But if you got them close to cotton, you're going to be okay probably. But you just have to sometimes feed, and really the management from about early to mid July after tallow is over until probably late August or September it's just miserable here, because the bees are unhappy. They've built up on the honey
Yeah.
flow. The mites are everybody's miserable. The beekeeper's miserable. The bees are miserable. So it's not a lot of fun in the summertime here at all.
Yeah. You do get pollen over the summer, right?
Yeah, we do. So it comes in. Yeah,
Yeah.
we have a trickle of pollen most of the year. There's a few times when it's not coming in, but most of the year, even in the
Yeah.
wintertime, they'll be bringing in pollen. I'm like, where the heck did you get that pollen? I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't see anything. There's nothing blooming. Everything's dead, and they'll still
Yeah.
be bringing it in sometimes. So I'm not sure where they find it, but there's a lot of swampy areas around and everything, and so they just go find it somewhere. I'm not sure where they get it from, but
Yeah. Sometimes it's kind of a mystery. Like, well, it's funny, you've been getting pollen since December. Our first pollen was like March 27th this year, I think.
uh-huh.
So we barely even have had pollen come in so far this year.
Yeah,
And most days the bees aren't really even able to fly. So someone was suggesting that I use pollen substitute, which I have a little bit in the past, but like right now we're getting maybe 3 days a week where they can fly. So using patties is much more reliable to get feed into them, because with the substitute, it's just kind of a crapshoot whether you're going to be able to fly again. But there is pollen if they do fly, so then they won't go to the substitute. So I haven't had any luck feeding substitute after March, really.
yeah. I don't. I've done a little bit of pollen sub, but like they just don't consume it usually here. I guess there's little pockets of time or little windows of time when they would consume it, but I did some open pollen feeding, pollen sub feeding, if you remember, right before pollination, and the bees just they love that. You know, I just put it out there, and like one of them, I just cut some holes in the side of a 5-gallon container and put the lid on and put the sub down that they got in that, and they really like. I just put a bee box on a pallet where you could put just a bee box out there and just pour the pollen in there, and they just they were rolling in it. They just had a great time with that. So that was. And they just downed it so fast. So, you know, if they're jumping on it, there's not much coming in. So that particular time they needed it, and it helped boost them for pollination. But so you can, if you really want to know if they need pollen, just put a little pollen open sub. You can do the same thing with sugar waters. Put a little bit out for them and see if they get in it. If they suck it down, you know, they probably need something. There's not much of a flow, if any. If they just leave it alone, then you know there's something coming in. And so that's a test you can do before you go. I have gone like kind of panicked and filled all my open feeders with sugar water and they don't touch it because there's a flow. So I'm like, dadgum, the flow started like that day or whatever. So if you just put out a little bit, like a little gallon bucket or something with some straw in it, and see if they get on that, if they jump on that, or if you're going through your colonies or your hives and you're scraping the comb off on the ground, or you're putting it in a bucket, which I've started doing, you know, the waste of the burr comb and stuff. If you save that and if it's got honey on it, the bees are all, if the bees are all in that, just trying to get it all out. Then you know you probably need to feed them, or there's not much of a flow going on. You got to be careful for robbing and things like that. So there are some tests you can do to see if you need to feed, unless you just feed all the time. Like some people, if they're trying to build their colonies, you know, like my buddy Tyler down here, that's he sells nukes and he's always growing bees. He always feeds just constantly because he's always doing splits, introducing queens, you know, selling nukes, drawing comb. And so if you're doing that, if you're trying to just make a bunch of bees, then just feed them all the time. It's fine. But if you're doing that, you need to probably either bucket feed or, feed inside the colony, because they won't touch open feed if they don't really need it. But but some people just feed constantly like that. But it's a money thing for me. I don't want to, and it's an effort thing. I don't really want to feed them unless I need to. But if I get into the bee making business and start selling more nukes and things like that, or queens and things like that, and have to build bees, then I would obviously feed a lot more.
I mean, same thing with Bob. If you watch his videos,
they feed
just all the time.
Well, Seth, that day I was with Seth, like he has the tank on the truck and we've just fed every colony. It's just it's just something they kind of do. I'm sure they don't. I'm sure in a big flow, like when they're doing honey, I'm sure they probably don't feed them, but
no,
you know, if in doubt, I think they just feed. And I should probably feed more, but you know, I just don't. That's probably my biggest lacking area now in my beekeeping is the nutrition part of it. But somehow they do okay.
So you've really been focusing on the past couple of years lowering the losses you have during that post tallow after you've pulled the supers. Can you just talk about what you're doing with that and your goals with that?
Well, first of all, I think you have to kind of figure out what might be causing that, which I had no idea. In my early beekeeping days, I'm sure not the best at it, but I would just I wasn't really, you know, I would treat for mites. What does that even mean? I don't know if I have a mite problem. I didn't know. I just would do oxalic acid or whatever, do something and think I was doing what I needed to do. But, you know, what I think happened in those cases, I think it happens a lot here in the South is, if you can imagine, you stack. Last year I ran out of honey supers. So I had a problem because I had my bees, I had them stacked up, and I couldn't get them harvested soon enough, and I didn't want to really put them back on because it was about the end of the honey flow. And so what happened was, I think it happened the year before too, is that the bees, this is one of the things that happens. I think the bees pack it out with honey and they start backfilling. And so if you can imagine, because if the honey's coming in, they're going to put it somewhere. They don't just quit making honey.
No,
so that they will feel like the queen will quit laying, and they'll just condense that brood space down and down and down to where there's just not hardly anywhere for her to lay. And so what happens at that point in time is, if you're about the time you pull the honey is probably when they're about honey bound. And then they they just don't, they get an attrition that
Yeah.
happens and the population starts to go down. At the same time, the hive beetle population peaks
Yeah.
and the mite population, as the brood, is not there, and there are, there's just, anyway, what happens is I think you have more mites for fewer bees, you have more beetles, you have like a perfect storm, and the queens just land in a little small areas. So I think
Yeah.
those three things, I think it's too many mites, too many beetles, and a decrease in population, a rapid decrease due to honeybound status. That's one of the reasons I
Yeah.
think with the backfill. The other reason is I just think old queens, I think some of the queens fizzle out. The third reason is I think a mite problem. I haven't been real good about managing mites. Last year, 2 years ago, I just had a horrible loss, like
Yeah.
hive beetle slimes everywhere. It was
Ugh.
awful, probably 40 or 50% 2 years ago. Last year, I lost really a small number of my production colonies that didn't go to California. Most of them
Yeah.
did fine, a very small percentage of those. But I was able to treat and manage them better in the spring and winter because they weren't in California. When they
Yeah.
came back from California, they were so packed, and I didn't treat when they got back. I just started doing splits. I never treated them until the summer. So I think what happened is the same thing happened on those. I think the exact same thing happened to the pollination bees. Even both the donor colonies and the new splits I made, I think the same thing happened. I think they got honey bound, or they had mite problems, or some of the queens were older. But that's kind of, I tested them in, after the honey was taken off. They had a pretty high mite load. I tried to treat doing some things with Apigar with a half dose. I tried some different things.
Yeah.
I tried some other techniques that are a little off label. That's what I did first, and it wasn't as effective as I hoped. And so then I tried some Apigard, but I'd already lost a bunch of them by then. And so this year, my goal is anyway, that's what I did. So I lost far fewer this past year than the previous year, but the ones that I treated the same way, I had the same results. And so I think I've just got to do a better job of getting those mites down right after the honey comes off. And I also want to stay ahead of them with equipment so I can stack honey supers up as high as they need to go. So hopefully they won't backfill the brood chamber as bad. So those are some things I'm working on. Hive beetles weren't as much of a problem for me last year as they were two years ago. They were everywhere.
Yeah.
And but last year they weren't as bad. I think part of it is I honestly used some of the peppermints. I don't know if it helped, but old Earl talks about those, and I didn't do it consistently. I did do it some, and but they just weren't as bad last year. I think maybe the colonies were stronger overall. I didn't have near as many hive beetles last year, and I tried to stay on top of them better. But I do think mites was somewhat of an issue. So that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to just manage the mites and the beetles better in the space better this year. Mites is probably the biggest thing I'm trying to do. Also Cayman talks about great queens. I think I'm trying to get the average age of queens down, like trying to have more young. I mean, I'm going to have some old queens, but if I can have more younger queens and the average age is younger.
Yeah.
And by one way to do this is by splitting. You split, you have more, you introduce new queens, and then your average age will be lower. But the interesting thing last year was that, I made all those splits off the pollination bees, and the loss is almost the same on the splits that I pulled off and on the donor colonies. So the old queen theory doesn't work there unless those old queens, unless they just superseded, which some of them probably did, but I don't know. It's a mystery.
Yeah. Do you, so I know you've bought cells in the past and you have this year. Do you think, I remember you saying you don't think your schedule would work out for grafting. So do you think you'll do kind of a flyback split method in the future, or?
Yeah, I've been doing all kinds of stuff this year, trying some different things. Like last week I was up at the pollination bees that got left behind.
Yeah.
I think there was like 7 or 8 up there over there, and a couple of them pretty strong. And I just did some basically walk away splits, just did some different things. I've done the 1 to 4 way split. I've done some with cells. I haven't done a specific flyback split method. The other day I was thinking about doing that, but I actually did a little bit different. I can't remember. I actually did that with a couple of Greg's queens up at the farm. I kind of did a flyback split, also did a what's it called? OTS split. Just played around with that a little bit. So I'm just trying some things. I don't want to do a video on it really, because I just want to see how they work first. I do a lot of videos of me doing things for the first time. And I just want to figure out how to do some stuff and see if it works for me first before I do some of that stuff. And so I've been trying all
Yeah.
kinds of just crazy stuff this year. I did
Yeah.
all that like right after we had talked to Greg about different ways to make queens. So I'm going to
Yeah.
see if it works. Some of the things that he talked about.
Yeah. Yeah, I started grafting queens in 2021, and I've had some luck, but hoping to get higher acceptance on my cells. But it's
Mhm.
interesting. Earlier you mentioned about splitting hives because you'd rather. Cayman says the same thing. You'd rather split a hive and have them make less honey than them swarm on you before the flow starts. And I was thinking about it, and I don't know if there's any beekeepers that I can think of, at least on YouTube, that don't actually split their bees before the flow. For I think mainly for that reason.
Yeah, I don't know. I just what I do is I just kind of read the hive. I don't like go unless it's the pollination bee. Sometimes I go in with the
Yeah.
mindset I'm going to split all my colonies. But like, and I did pull like
Yeah.
35 splits a few weeks ago. But typically, I just let them like I increase space. If they're
Yeah.
too packed out, if I'm seeing cells, I may split. I don't just go into my bee yard typically and just say, I'm going to do this to all my colonies. I just really like you'll look at them in the honey flow, and I'll have some that are like 3 boxes deep and some that are 6 boxes deep. I just
Yeah.
let them have. I try to read the strength of the colony and try to customize what I'm doing for each colony. That's just kind of how I've
Yeah.
always done it. So I don't necessarily go into the year thinking I'm going to split all my colonies, but I don't necessarily believe that you won't get more honey in the long run because when
Yeah.
you split them, some of those splits will blow up.
Yeah.
Some of those splits will make you a box of honey, and if they were in the trees,
Yeah.
then they wouldn't make a box of honey. And so I don't know if I agree that I mean, if you split them and split them, it's one thing. But if you just take an
Yeah.
early split out, like some of these nukes down there that I saw today that were accepted, I mean, some of those
Yeah.
queens just have like they're in a 5 frame nuke, they have like 4 frames of sheet, just solid sheet brood. And so I'm like, they're gonna definitely make honey.
Yeah.
I mean, I actually had to. I was kind of glad they didn't all work out because I used some of the boxes to double
Yeah.
stack some
Yeah.
of them because they were
Yeah.
just I didn't have any. They were going to explode. I didn't have extra equipment with me, and so um, I think overall your average will be better. But yeah, I think you'd rather split them than have them in the trees. But I think by
Absolutely.
splitting them, I think you still can make a lot of honey if they explode. I mean, I know it's different down here where we're doing this like in
Yeah.
February and March. And
Yeah.
you guys don't even get started really up there until May and
May.
June, and so it's
Yeah.
a whole different, it's a bigger. But we've got a couple extra months, and how many 4 or 5 brood cycles, 3 or 4 brood cycles more,
Yeah.
and so we have time to do that. I've caught swarms before that were like a soccer ball size swarm that ended up making me a couple boxes of honey the first year. It's just it's just crazy.
Yeah. The difference between the South and the North. One of the many differences, but you're making splits in February or March, but we can't really make splits till about mid-May. But like your tallow flow is, I mean, it's like maybe a few weeks earlier than my main flow, but it's not that far off. So it's like I was talking to someone from Texas a few weeks ago, and she was like, "Yeah, all the splits that I make, I plan to make honey on them." She makes them so
Yeah.
big, and she has so much time that she's able to make. She's like, "Yeah, the goal on every hive is to make my 2 boxes of honey off." And even on all my splits, which for here is unheard of. I mean, maybe if you make it really strong split and you get lucky and you could do it if you were able to buy mated queens from the south. But if you want to make your own queens, there's no chance that you're going to be able to build up that high for the honey flow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just and like Tim Ives, man,
Yeah.
I don't know if you know who he is, if you've seen his stuff or not.
I've heard you talk about them. Yeah.
But he has these colonies that are 9 and 10 boxes deep, and he does a
Yeah.
3 deep system. And man, they have such a huge field force that they make so much honey. And he manages them in a way to where it prevents swarming, and he just has a way to do it. And he's up north. It's very cold up there, and
Yeah.
he's up there in Indiana. But he just has a way that works. But I think a lot of it's genetics. It's
Yeah.
just so I just think my bees here. I did have that one triple deep that I did that year that had 315 pounds of honey.
Nuts.
That's the
Yeah.
only one that's even come close
Yeah.
to doing that though. And so I thought, well, this is the way to go. I can just have a few colonies and make a ton of honey, a lot of honey,
Yeah.
but I couldn't duplicate it ever again. I got a couple 100 pounds off of a few, but
Yeah.
I never could get one that did that. But that thing just It was literally like the dang international airport. I mean, it was just constantly the bees were flying just like a dang. It was crazy. It was like rush hour traffic coming out of that thing. Just for 2 or 3 months, and they literally made me 315 pounds of honey, and that might even be. I think that's a very yeah that's about what it was. I think that's what we ended up
Yeah.
thinking. So, but it was about 9 or 10 feet tall. I had to get on a ladder
Yeah.
to. It was not. I don't want to do that at age 55, but it was
Was
a fun
that
project.
was that the mega hive?
Yeah, that was the mega
Yeah.
hive back when I used to film with my camera vertical,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
that stuff back then. But those videos got a lot of views, and people obviously a lot of people were critical, but it worked. But I
Yeah.
couldn't duplicate it, not to that extent again. And so you know, I found that here most colonies here in this area about a deep and a medium is about the right amount of brood space.
Yeah.
And I run some that are single deeps and some that are double deeps,
Yeah.
and but the it's about a deep and a medium is about the perfect for most of our southern bees here for the flow that we have. And a lot of mine are deeps and mediums. And so the pollination bees are pretty much all that
Yeah.
configuration. But it just works out. We just figure it out. And I just, like I said, I give them the space they need. My preferred management, honestly, is double deeps. I like doing double
Yeah.
deeps. I don't, I mean, single deeps, I understand why people say it's better,
Yeah.
but you just got to watch those jokers so close or they'll swarm on you because
Yeah.
they pack the whole bottom box out with brood, and it's just you got to stay on top of them and
More
make sure
feeding.
you
So yeah.
make sure you really. And in certain parts of the country or world, it may be better to do it that way. But I just think with the double deep, in my experience, a lot of mine are double deeps, my production colonies. They just
Yeah.
have room to do what they want to do, and they're going to be less likely to want to swarm that way. I don't know that you're utilizing the space in the best way possible. Sometimes they just ignore some frames in those double deeps,
Yeah.
which is not the most efficient thing, but they have room to do what they want to do. And I think it shuts down some of the tendency to swarm.
For sure.
But really, once they start bringing in once they start bringing the nectar, and they start going
Yeah.
into that hoarding mode, if you give them space, I think the swarming tendency leaves a little bit anyway, if they have
Yeah.
the space. So once you get past that, once the big flows kick in, if you've managed it properly,
Yeah.
it seems like they don't tend to swarm as much then anyway.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million variables, and
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
you just never know. But I would agree. Like in my head, I break down swarming into two like main ideas. You got congestion swarming, which happens before the flow, and then you got honeybound swarming. Honeybound swarming
Yeah,
doesn't happen
sure.
to beekeepers who have drawn comb, but
Yeah,
the congestion swarming is still an issue even for beekeepers who have a lot of comb, so they can just get
sure.
ahead of you. And I have not lost a swarm yet, or very few, maybe one. And that's because I have a lot of, not very many hives and a lot of time on my hands. So I
Sure.
want to be in there as much as I can. But um, I also have been doing a lot of splitting, and I
Hmm.
hope this year to try a new method for honey. I heard several beekeepers are doing it. I'm going to move all my hives just to two locations as drone flooding yards for my mating nukes. And while I'm going to do that, I'm going to try something where I'm going to go double queen. So I'm going to have
Hmm.
a single deep on the bottom with a queen excluder, and then put one drawn super above that, and then maybe two empty supers, and then put another deep with a queen excluder below it, and just and an inner cover up top so the drones
Hmm.
can get out. And then it'll be like I've heard that the bigger your hive are, the higher percentage of them become foragers. So hopefully I'll be able to make a bigger crop
Yeah,
on average. Yeah,
that's absolutely true.
yeah.
Did you get that? Did you read an article about that, doing that method in bee culture?
I had seen that article, but I've heard several things. Beekeeping
Okay.
today, so other
Okay.
YouTubers say, yeah, same idea though.
Because I saw that. Yeah, but
Yeah,
it is. You have a bigger field force. They're much more efficient, and
yeah,
it's like they just multiply the impact. Of bringing that honey so much. That's why those triple deep systems, if they work properly, they're just monsters. I mean, they bring in so much more honey
yeah,
than the single deeps do. It's not even close. I think it's way more than they say the result is greater than the sum of the parts.
yeah,
It's more than triple the honey. If you have three single deep colonies and
yeah,
you're making honey, or you have a triple deep colony that's set up properly with enough, with the
yeah,
full like 12 or 14 frames of brood or whatever, I think that I know that I'm pretty sure that the triple deep will
Yeah.
outperform because, you know, single deep around here, I think average honey in Alabama is probably 50, 60 pounds per colony, if even
Yeah.
that. But
About the same here. Yeah.
I got 315 pounds off of that one
Yeah.
colony. So it's just, I think but it's just very, very, it's just
Yeah.
hard to be consistent. But you have to have the right genetics and the right conditions and really know how to
Yeah.
manage those perfectly.
Yeah. Got
David's
one
bee farm.
question. Yeah.
I
To
know.
end the night. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, I
You
know
want to read it?
David. I think this is David. I think is that even that might be a picture of me with David on there. That's where I went and got the boxes last year.
Yeah.
That's David where I went and picked up all those medium supers. He really
Yeah.
helped me to crunch last year. But the double deeps, have you seen the queen move up and stay there and not really moving back down? Yes, I have, David. That can be a problem. And I typically just reverse them when
Mhm.
that happens. But if it's in the middle of a honey flow and you're not going in your brood chambers, you may not even know that's happening.
Yeah.
And so, and if it's that way too, if they're not really growing, you can just break it back down to a single deep. Just take all the frames where they're building, all the brood, all the honey and everything, and just turn it into a single deep. But
Yep.
they will in the wintertime, they'll move up. Typically, they'll move up, and then you hope in the spring they'll move back down, but they don't always do that. But you can just reverse them, and it works well. I've started doing that some. I've learned some of that from Mr. Ed and Mike Berry do
Yeah.
that. And I know a lot of people do the reversals, and you can do that even with a deep and a medium. You can put the medium on the bottom. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you can, I typically just reverse them. But when I'm in the middle of tallow flow,
Yeah. No, it's not. Yeah.
I don't really go in the brood boxes then. Cause
Yeah.
usually have 2 or 3 boxes of honey stacked on top or 4. And that's one reason I get in trouble because I don't do a lot of inspections and evaluations at that time. I think I also probably get a lot of queens superseded or
Yeah.
that swarm sometimes then and make new queens. I think I have a lot of young queens that happen every year from that, but I just don't fool with them much. If I crack
Yeah.
the top box open, the lid open on a 5 deep box that's got
Yeah.
it's got either a deep or double deep or whatever, and then 3 honey boxes stacked on top. I usually don't remove all those honey supers in check. But when all the honey comes off, I start getting into the hives and evaluating. Then I do see that happen sometimes. Those bees have stayed in that second box all spring. They never went to the bottom box, and that does happen. But that's one way I kind of manage that is I'll reverse them. And then I'll see if they stay down in the bottom box and build in the second box. And if they do, then I'll leave them alone. If they don't, if they just kind of come up to the second box and then leave the bottom box empty, I'll just turn them into a single deep or a deep and a
Yeah.
medium.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million different configurations you can go with, but yeah, that's a common thread between beekeepers is there's not a whole lot you can
Yeah.
do when there's 3 or 4 boxes of honey on. Like maybe you could get through 2 or 3 colonies, but you can't get through everyone when there's that many boxes
Yeah,
on.
if you pull like we've had some double deeps
Yeah.
here when we pulled some of those splits back a few weeks back. I pulled 2 nukes off of some of those,
Yeah.
and so then you really just you may not need to have a double deep. Then you can just
Yeah.
let them
You
stay
can
in a
just
single
move
for a
them to
while.
single. Yeah.
Just because you're pulling. If you pull it kind of, I don't know, you just have to play with it. But if you leave plenty of foundation stuff from to do in that bottom box, you might
Yeah.
not need to make it a double. You can just leave it a single. But there's so many ways to manage it. Some people they will not do anything except single deep management. And that's
Yeah.
but that's what they're comfortable with. And that's fine. A lot of people around here, that's what they do. And that's perfectly fine. I just am a little bit too lazy to manage it. I have to, for a single deep, I think you really have to watch them close and manage them or they'll get,
Yeah.
you just get in trouble with it. I just like to let the bees do what they want to do. And I may not be as efficient. I may have some boxes not used totally efficiently, but that's okay for me. I don't really care.
I think you have to be more full. If you have over 100 colonies and you're doing single deep management, it's going to be pretty challenging if you have a full-time job.
Yeah.
Yeah,
People do it. You can do it, but that's what I prefer to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming on tonight, Bruce. I had a great time. Great talking to you.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I love your videos. Keep them up, and I'm excited to see what you have coming down the pipe. Since I got a sneak peek tonight.
Well, I hope I can get it put together into something that's enjoyable. I always shoot way too much footage, it seems, and so then I got to edit it down. And I'm going to try to do a video. I don't know, maybe if folks can, before you jump off, maybe put the thoughts here in the comments after we get off. But I'm thinking about doing a video of how I shoot my videos. I think it'd be kind of fun, like what equipment I use. It's really simple what I do. and just some of the things I look at that I've learned over the years, some different techniques
Yeah.
to kind of help. I really like for people to be able to feel like they're looking over my shoulder or right there with me.
Yeah.
And so that's something I've tried to figure out how to do. And I'm still not great at it, but I'm getting better at it. And so just a few things, maybe the equipment I use, and just to
Yeah.
show people how simple it really is to do what I do. And not that what I do is right or wrong, but just kind
Yeah.
of some ideas or some suggestions that may help some folks. But got Stan Gore on here. Yeah, Stan is
Yeah.
awesome. Stan, okay, so I got to tell you this story real quick since he's on here. I used to just do videos where I just kind of set the camera up and I talk, and they were
Yeah.
long, and I try to, back in the day, to get mid roll or to
Yeah.
get, mid roll, or what do they call it? Yeah, mid roll
Mid ad roll. Yeah.
ads, mid roll ads. You had to, they had to be 10 minutes long. So I would do, I
Yeah.
didn't think I would probably try to make, I would pretty much try to make them 10 minutes. And now it's 8 minutes. And so I thought, well, I want to get that mid roll ads to make more money. And so I wouldn't worry about trying to be super efficient with my videos. And Stan would get on me. He would say, you never need to have a video over 4 minutes. That's what he told me. He's like, get your videos under 4 minutes. And I didn't know who he even was. I'm like, man, what are you doing? Tell me what to do. You know what I mean? I would get a little, but then I kind of took that to note. And though my videos now some of them are longer.
Yeah.
If you notice, I try to cut out a lot of the fat, a lot of the stuff. Like I start off usually, one techniques I use is I'll show a couple of frames, like I take them out, but then after I get through the first 2 or 3 frames, I'll just kind of cut out. I'll cut out the actually removing the frame, because that's like 15 seconds, each frame. And so that can add up to, so there's little things like that I try to, I don't know, there's little tricks, but the biggest thing I want to do is just do a video of kind of what my setup is, how I set it up near, because I shoot almost everything by myself. And that's the issue. It's hard. I wish I had a videographer. And I've actually been thinking a lot about that. The problem is I do use my iPhone to do everything now. And so how am I going to film myself because I only have one iPhone? So I'll figure something out, but I've been talking to my wife about it. Maybe she'll help me out with some videography a little bit here or there, but she doesn't want to get around the bees, but maybe we can figure out something. But anyway, I appreciate you having me on tonight. And I'm going to just try and keep the videos coming. And I've been trying to do some of these interview type things. The live streams, of course, we do the stream team every Wednesday night. We try to, and then I've been trying to do some intentional beekeeping interviews with different people. And I like that format as well. So I'm always thinking of things, and I'm always busy trying to do stuff. And I'm probably trying to do more than I should, but it's fun. I enjoy it. So I appreciate your support.
Beekeeper way.
I appreciate your support, Rainier, and everyone on here. And y'all, if you haven't subscribed to Rainier's channel, subscribe and tell your friends about it. He's doing a good job.
Thanks. Yeah. Have a good night, Bruce.
All right.
Yeah. Talk to you another time.
All right. Bye-bye.
Yeah.